Hi, my name is Ricardo Loyola, and this is my critical family history. To give you an idea of what my family looks like, attached is a picture of my family back in 2017. On the far left side is my stepfather, Jorge Torres Reyes. The tallest person in the picture is I, Ricardo Loyola. On the right side is my mother. Her name is Coyinta Herrera Torres. On the left side is my younger brother, Anthony Torres. And then at the very end is my youngest brother, Jonathan Torres. So when starting this assignment, I was a bit confused and struggled on where to start. My family history in the US is only 2 years older than I am, as both my parents came in 1996 to the US. And so the big confusion for me was where to start. And so then after researching and investigating, I came up with this idea. I will start with basically the world that existed prior to my family's history in the United States. So basically US-Mexican relations, and then moving on to what my parents went through while they were here and different policies that affected them as they were living in the United States. And so starting with part one, it's just US-Mexican relations prior to my family's arrival in 1996. And so starting with this, we have to go all the way back to the Treaty of Guadalupe. And so when starting with the Treaty of Guadalupe, which ended the Mexican-American War, all that is highlighted in green was Mexico prior to the Mexican-American War, and all the one in yellow is the United States prior to the Mexican-American War. And so what the Treaty of Guadalupe does is it quote-unquote bought land off of Mexico after the war, and you'll see in a second that all that is in white became part of the United States. And so the big question is, what happens to all the Mexicans that are still living on this land that is now the US? And so basically what the Treaty of Guadalupe does is it gives years for those Mexicans to either A, go back to Mexico territory, or stay in the United States and live as American citizens with rights that are protected by the Treaty of Guadalupe. For the Mexicans that stayed with the idea that they would live as US citizens, slowly started to realize that this was all a lie. And it starts with A, the Hounds, which was basically the KKK for Latinos, as they hunted down not just Mexicans, but anyone that resemblance anything Latino. And then back at home, they were discriminated against and denied the rights that they were promised with the Treaty of Guadalupe, as they were segregated with prototype Jim Crow laws that later are seen with African Americans. And as we continue through the timeline, we see injustices such as massacres occurring to Mexican communities. We see politicians talking about having Latinos here because they're great workers. We'll keep them, but then when they're done working, we'll send them back to Mexico. And there were mass deportations of Mexicans in the United States. And the key thing to remember is that it didn't matter if they were quote-unquote legal or quote-unquote illegal immigrants. Regardless, they were just getting deported. And so this is important to look at because it gives you an idea of the treatment of Mexicans in the United States. And this is the world that my parents were coming into. And so that brings us to part two, which is 1996, the world that my parents stepped into, and basically just looking at the different policies that affected our everyday life. And so both my parents land in New York, Dyckman Street, which is entering New York a little bit past the bridge. And so they're here in Dyckman Street, New York, 1996. And so my mom lands a job as a dishwasher at a restaurant. She is 17 years old. And my dad, who's also 17 years old, is working as a construction worker in New York. And so fast forward a couple years, my parents meet. I am born, and we're still in New York in 1998 until 2001. In 2001, with the 9/11 attacks, my parents were worried since we live near here, and they decided to move to Maryland. Once upon arriving in Maryland, we moved to Prince George's County. And so this ends up being a blessing in disguise, sort of, because the moment they arrive in Maryland, there is now a policy called Maryland Tax ID, which allows for undocumented immigrants to receive a tax ID and be able to pay income tax. However, the counter storytelling side is that despite being able to pay taxes and income tax, they cannot receive any Social Security, they cannot receive Medicare, they cannot receive any benefits that come with taxes. So then later in 2003, they pass a act that basically allows undocumented immigrants to apply and receive credit cards. And this is huge because now, in the sense, now you can buy a car, you can get car insurance, you can get a credit card. It allows you to sort of start to build up wealth in this country. And so then comes around the market crash of 2008. And so now these undocumented immigrants who are now buying houses, buying cars, well, they can't maintain this with the high interest with the market crash, and they end up losing everything. However, going back to the tax ID, remember that they don't receive any sort of benefits from that side. So they lose and they stay down instead of losing and then a program helping them out. And then as well, President Obama comes in with this whole promise to help illegal immigrants and make their quality of life higher, but instead increases the deportation numbers, mainly around organized crime, but there were incidents that were incorrectly deported. Then 8 years later comes President Trump, who comes with an even higher dislike towards illegal immigrants and promises mass deportations, includes false narrative on Latinos when he quote unquote saying that they are criminals, they are rapists, they bring crime, and so on. And so with this deportation is far, far, far more extreme than Obama, as the mass deportation includes anyone who's undocumented. Under the Obama administration, they were deporting people based off of crimes and warrants. Under Trump's administration, it did not matter. You are undocumented, you're leaving. That's how it went. And so moving on, you even get to see, for example, Trump's administration trying to get rid of the DACA Act, which basically gave protection to undocumented children that came to the United States at a very young age. Fortunately for us, we lived in Howard County by this, and Alan Kittleman, Howard County executive at the time, basically made Howard County a sanctuary city, meaning that unless you had a criminal warrant, ICE would not be able to deport you. And so fast forward to 2020, we take a look at COVID and how that played a role. And so everyone's at home, they're getting helped out with unemployment, stimulus checks, forgiveness on behind payments, except for undocumented immigrants. Since they don't receive any benefits from those type of policies, they still had to go out to work. I specifically remember my dad got COVID at the construction job he was working in because his boss said, doesn't matter, we're still coming to work. Which then brings us more to now the end, which is the connections to me. And so growing up, I had to deal with the constant fear of deportation. Even though I would not be deported, I know that my parents had that possibility. And so growing up, if my parents took too long to get back from work, if my parents didn't come back from work and they couldn't tell because at the phone they would wear no cell phones, I had that constant fear that they got my parents, because there's no way of communicating and letting them know that they're okay, that they're just coming home late. And that follows up the constant moving around, because we're following around my dad's job to make sure that he could stay and continue working, so that way he can maintain the household. And so then comes the situation where both my parents worked 2 or more jobs because their goal was to make sure that me and my brothers were okay. And so a lot of times that caused them to be too tired to go to parent-teacher conferences. They were too tired to go back to school night, attend any of our school events, because they had to work. At the end of the day, their main goal was to make sure that my brothers and I were able to live comfortably. Comes along the predicament of me constantly watching my parents work multiple jobs, mainly blue-collar jobs. Then comes to the issue where I could never picture myself in those shoes because my examples, unfortunately, did not have that opportunity. And fortunately for me, with the support of my parents, I was able to graduate high school and be the first in my family to ever achieve a high school diploma. Fortunately for me, I was able to get a full scholarship and go to college and be the first in my family to achieve a bachelor's degree in our family history, which is a huge milestone in our family, as I am showing my siblings as well that they can do it. And to tie this all together, the importance of having all these experiences to me as an educator and aspiring administrator is that I can bring these experiences to the table when policy is being made, when ideas are being thrown around, and bring consideration of these experiences that students could possibly be facing as I experienced myself. And to bring light to them, I'm not blind to their situation, and I feel that makes me more compassionate to the students and more flexible to work with them. And when I say them, I don't mean just the students. I talk about the community as well, including families, other staff members. And at the end of the day, my biggest goal is that when I leave, that there are more students who look into the mirror, and instead of seeing blue-collar workers, they see themselves in an office as a doctor, as an engineer, as a pilot. That would be my biggest dream.